So today we are going to talking about the chapter 9, Communicable Disease Epidemiology. Today's section including 5 small sections: introduction, etiology of communicable disease, the infectious process and the spectrum of communicable disease. We also talking about 3 links in the epidemic process and how we can prevent and control the communicable disease. Learning objectives including to master the concept of communicable disease, 3 links in epidemic process, prevention and control of communicable disease. We only need to be familiar with Koch postulates, etiology, infection process, and the spectrum. And to understand the burden of communicable disease, factors that can impact on infectious disease, and also get to know some new and re-emergent infectious disease. First one, introduction. We first look at the introduction of the definition and the characteristics of communicable disease. So what is a communicable disease? Communicable disease or infectious disease are caused by the presence of microbes and can be transmitted to humans from other humans, animals, or the environment. So this kind of disease also called transmissible disease due to the potential of transmission from one person to another. So Koch's postulates, which means if we want to define the communicable disease, we need to satisfy these 4 definitions. First one, the microorganism must be found in the abundance in all organisms suffering from the disease, but should not be found in healthy organisms. The microorganisms must also be isolated from a diseased organisms and grown in pure culture. The cultured microorganism can cause the disease when it's introduced into a healthy organisms. The microorganisms can be isolated from the inoculated disease experimental host and identified. So these postulates just need to familiar with. Now we are look at the burden of communicable disease of some common disease. So as we can find in the table 9.1, it's a table describing the incidence of selected infectious disease by WHO region according to the report in 2004. So this table lists few diseases that with high incidence. So as we can see, the diarrhea disease and the malaria has top incidence rate around the world, especially in Africa. So these figures shows the top 10 cause of death in low-income countries according to the WHO. As we can see, the first 3 disease with highest cause of death, including lower respiratory infection disease, HIV/AIDS, and the diarrhea disease. And in the recent decades, we also have new and re-emerging infectious disease. And many factors are responsible for emergence of this new disease. For example, the change in human demography and the behavior, international travel and commerce, so the business trip or personal trip between different countries, and the technology and the industry development, also microbiome adaptation and change, and the breakdown of public health measures and the deficiency in public health infrastructure. So this table 9.2 describe the domains and emergence of condition of some emerging infectious disease. So as we can see here, AIDS was first time reported in 1983. But in fact, the AIDS was believed that original from Africa. And also in 2003, the SARS coronavirus was originated from South Province of China, which is Guangdong Province, and then it spread to some countries in the world. I think this SARS coronavirus has around 8,000 cases of death. So here lists some example of the epidemiology of measles, including causative organism, host, mode of transmission, incubation period of communicability, and their usual symptoms, complications, and the mortality rate. This is a description of how epidemiology can be used in describing or studying or investigating the communicable disease. So in general, epidemiology study can be used for the following application. For example, we can use epidemiology to identify the cause of new or emerging infections such as COVID-19, as we are saying, and used to monitor the communicable disease, to identify the source of outbreaks, to study the routes of transmission and the nature history of infections, such as when is the peak of an infectious disease and when the infectious disease was supposed to disappear. And we can also use epidemiology study to identify and evaluate the new interventions, such as lockdown for those cities that with very serious spread of disease, or to identify and evaluate some preventive measures, such as we have already used in the COVID-19, such as hand washing, quarantine, social distancing, etc. So we can use epidemiology to identify and to evaluate if these new interventions are effective in stop the spreading of the infectious disease. So in these figures, I found some data from WHO. So here's some timelines of identification of COVID-19. So in January 9 of 2020, WHO reported that Chinese authorities have determined that the outbreak is caused by a novel coronavirus, and in 24th of January, WHO held an informal consultation on the prioritizations of candidate therapeutic agents for use in novel coronavirus infection. In February 11, 2020, WHO announced that the disease caused by the novel coronavirus could be named COVID-19. So in this figure, we identified the timeline for the COVID-19 identifications in Wuhan. This is one of the first study that published in Lancet. So this studies describe the 41 cases that was first detected in Wuhan. So there was a theory that Wuhan Huanan seafood market was the outbreak epidemic centers for COVID-19. So this study, the blue column, means there's no the cases was not connected with COVID-19 exposure, and the red one means the cases was somehow linked to Huanan seafood market exposure. So as we can see, most of the cases was actually related to Huanan seafood markets. Among the first reported 41 cases, we believe at least 28 cases had direct link to Huanan seafood markets. but whether or not the Huanan seafood market was an origin of the COVID-19 was not really sure. So some reports says that Wuhan's Huanan seafood might not be the source of novel virus spreading globally, but it's sure that it's a spot that first detect outbreak of COVID-19. So here's some few lectures, a few pictures of Huanan seafood market, so people can sell and buy those different seafood and also the wild animals in the supermarket in this seafood markets. As we know, WHO and China together released a long-awaited joint reports about the origin of COVID-19 on 30 March 2021. This report says that the transmission from bats to another animals and subsequently to humans could be the most likely way that pandemic began.